Coming up next on KPBS Evening Edition, protesters marched to the Civic Center to officially kick off Occupy San Diego. We'll have a look at the protest and some of the reactions.
No shot, no school for San Diego students who missed the deadline for their whooping cough vaccine. We'll tell you how many students were forced to stay home.
And an amazing sight just off San Diego's coastline. Blue whales closer to shore than usual. We'll tell you what's drawing them in. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Joanne Farian.
And I'm Dwane Brown. We are learning more tonight about a federal crackdown on California's medical marijuana businesses.
That's coming up in just a few moments. But first, the protest movement spreading across the country has made its way to San Diego. Occupy San Diego began this afternoon. Hundreds of people marched from Children's Park to the Civic Center Plaza. They say they're protesting corporate greed. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson is at the demonstration. Eric, tell us what's happening.
Well, a little while ago in the afternoon, people began to gather at Children's Park across the street from the convention center. Several hundred people gathered there, and after a few hours, they decided it was time to march to City Hall. They came to City Hall. They stayed here. They cheered for a while. They whistled, and then they marched back to the Children's Park. What they're doing is they're kind of expressing their unease with some of the things that are going on in the country, linked to the banking crisis, linked to the economic collapse. It's a movement we've seen in a lot of cities around the country. It started in New York a couple of weeks ago. People are still sitting out there. And it's intended to be the same kind of thing here in San Diego. Before the march actually got started, we had a chance to talk to a couple of the people that had come out to take part.
We have voted people into office, and we can take them out, too. And we want to let them know that we're watching them. And we want them to do what they said they would do, which is represent us, the 99%.
It's bringing a lot of these financial issues to the forefront, and people need to talk about it, because this is another problem that we have, is that we don't have any kind of useful discourse politically in this country. We call each other names, and it just doesn't seem to lead anywhere. We need to talk about these economic issues seriously and figure them out.
I'm surprised. It's a really good turnout. I thought there was going to be less people, but it's good to see that more people like to show their love and appreciation. So it's good. It's a good turnout.
And it's what you would expect at a demonstration. You saw the signs: one citizen, $1, one vote, End the Fed, a sign that was made out of actual dollar bills. Sitting next to it was the owner of that sign sending email on his iPod. I thought that was a little bit interesting. And we just woke up to 99%. They are going to be at the Children's Park all night tonight, and they plan to stay there until tomorrow morning, at which time they'll come back to City Hall.
KPBS reporter Eric Anderson.
Now, the Occupy Wall Street movement has been criticized by all the Republican presidential candidates. San Diego's own GOP leadership has also been highly critical on its website. It calls the movement the consequence of extended unemployment. Quoting from a blog post by the party communications chair, Steve Ryder, "As foolish as they are, being unemployed for months can be maddening. Losing a home can be devastating. A simple, incorrect conclusion is to blame someone who has more wealth, and when you have the president campaigning around saying the wealthy aren't paying enough taxes, along with other class warfare, it's understandable why they are upset." He continues on, "Obviously, I don't agree with the way they are going about venting their frustration, but the point is the country's economy and employment must improve, or it's likely we will see more of this with increased levels of hate and violence." That blog post can be found on SanDiegoRepublicans.org.
Federal attorneys have outlined their plans for cracking down on medical marijuana in California. Last night, we told you about the order for dispensaries to shut down within 45 days. In a news conference today, the 4 U.S. attorneys based in California said they would go after commercial marijuana operations. They say growers and distributors have hijacked California's medical marijuana law. The attorneys say they will not focus on sick patients who grow pot for their own use. We'll have analysis of these latest developments coming up in just a few minutes.
The 30-day grace period for San Diego public school students to show proof they got a whooping cough booster shot ended yesterday. You may recall in early September, about 40,000 students hadn't completed the paperwork. KPBS education reporter Kyla Calvert joins us from the News Center. So, Kyla, do we know how many students were told to stay home today?
Toward the end of the day today, San Diego Unified officials were saying that about 1,100 students still had to submit their proof of vaccination or a personal belief waiver. But they were still waiting to get the final numbers from 2 large high schools, and so we're actually expecting the number of students who were sent home today to be below 1,000. And then the 7th through 12th graders that did show up for class today, who hadn't submitted that proof or had the personal belief waiver signed, were sent home with a list of the county health clinics where the boosters are available for $10.
And of course, we learned from all the state budget cuts, Kyla, when students miss class, it costs the school district. So how much are we talking about here?
Well, that's exactly right. The school district gets state funding based partially on attendance, and so it costs them about $26 for each student for each missed day. So if there were 1,000 students out today, that would be $26,000 that the school district lost today.
KPBS education reporter Kyla Calvert.
An active duty Navy SEAL has been found guilty in a scheme to sell machine guns and explosives from Iraq and Afghanistan in the United States. Petty Officer Nicholas Bickle could face decades in prison when he is sentenced next January. Federal agents found the weapons during raids here in San Diego and in Colorado and Las Vegas.
This is the 10th anniversary of the invasion of Afghanistan, but it wasn't mentioned during a service today honoring those killed in wars. The service at San Diego State University was to honor 5 students who were killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. One veteran told KPBS he's not surprised the 10th anniversary went without mention.
These wars have been going on for quite some time, and because of that, it's a routine in American society. So I'm really not surprised that today being the 10th anniversary, that it wasn't mentioned. I don't think that takes away from the significance of the dedication and the tribute given.
A recent Pew Research study shows a third of vets from Iraq and Afghanistan believe the wars are a waste. The San Diego Peace and Justice Coalition is planning to protest the ongoing wars next week.
This week, California's medical marijuana situation changed dramatically. There was a court order aimed specifically at San Diego shops, and more importantly, the federal government announced it would no longer ignore conflicts between state and federal drug laws. Joining me to talk about what's happened to medical marijuana and other top stories this week are KPBS Metro reporter Katie Orr and Jose Luis Jimenez, social media editor for the Fronteras Desk and KPBS. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Let's start with medical marijuana. A couple things happened this week on the city side and also on the federal side. What were those things, Katie?
Well, on the city side, San Diego city attorney told 12 dispensaries that they needed to shut down because he believed they were violating state law, which limits how close those dispensaries can be to schools. A judge then ordered that 9 of those dispensaries did in fact need to shut down, and I've since heard that all 12 of them did. At the same time, the U.S. attorney based here in San Diego, Laura Duffy, sent letters to those same 12 dispensaries saying they needed to shut down within 45 days because they were violating federal law. Of course, federal law does not allow for the sale of marijuana, and that's always been a conflict between California and the state. And Duffy joined the 3 other U.S. attorneys in California today for a news conference to announce that they're no longer going to be looking the other way. They're going to be going after these commercial producers of marijuana and distributors and telling them that they need to shut down.
Why now? Did they say why they're doing this now?
They didn't say specifically what led them to this decision. They said that they have been noticing that this has become less about medicine and more about money. These are supposed to be nonprofit organizations, but they say a lot of them are raking in a lot of money. They question whether the people using these centers have legitimate medical reasons. They say no, they're not. They say California is the #1 source for marijuana for the entire country. People come here with cards, get them, and take it and bring it to other parts of the state. So they say it's just, they said the movement's been hijacked and that they are not looking away anymore. And they said this is not just talk, it's going to be action. And they have all sent various letters to collectives in their area saying that they need to shut down within 45 days or the landowners would risk losing the property.
So, Kate, it sounds like they've sent them a warning. How do they plan to follow up after this warning? Are they going to be sending in undercover agents? They're going to be sending in SWAT teams? Where do they go from here?
Well, what they made it sound like is it's basically a real estate transaction. They will let they said they have the power. The federal government has the power to come in and take that property if they believe something illegal is happening there. They've sent not all dispensaries, but some of them a warning, a letter saying you have 45 days to either shut this dispensary down or come in compliance, or we're going to come and take your property. And they said this is very real, and it's not just a threat, and we will do this. And so they are hoping that those letters will spur these landowners into action because they don't want to lose their property.
So they say that the movement's been hijacked. What happens to the legitimate or so-called legitimate medical marijuana, community?
Well, they have said in this news conference that they're not interested in going after the cancer patient or the caregiver of that cancer patient who grows the medical marijuana in their backyard. Now, again, I mean, what is the limit? How many plants can you have in your backyard? At what point do you become a commercial operation? I don't know, but they made it clear they are interested in the operations that are making the money, the big ones. And the retail shops, they said a lot in this news conference today. When you drive down University Avenue in North Park and Hillcrest and you see these shops, it sounds like those are the ones that they are going to be going after.
Katie, any talk on the medical marijuana side? Are they preparing to challenge this in court? Any talk on that end?
Well, it's interesting because on the local level, medical marijuana advocates have been trying to work with the San Diego City Council to establish some kind of ordinance because, of course, we don't have a land use ordinance here. There's no zoning to say where these shops can and cannot be located. We went through this whole thing this summer where we had an ordinance that got overturned. We're back at square one. From a federal perspective, this sort of hit them all yesterday. They are a little bit shocked because the Obama administration had been looking the other way on these things, but in recent years have signaled more and more that that is going to stop. So certainly they will plan to fight it. They'll have their attorneys, and we'll probably see how this plays out in court.
We're going to move on to our other big story this week. Marijuana is, of course, grown south of the border as well, which brings us to the news out of Tijuana this week, and that's the nomination of a new chief of police. He's quite familiar to that city, having been chief once before. Now, Jose, you have been following this story. What do you know about the nominee?
His name is Alberto Capella. He was an attorney and a civilian, which is a sea change from the recent chiefs of police in Tijuana, which have come out of the Mexican Army. He served under the previous administration of Jorge Ramos from 2007 and 2009. And under his tenure, Tijuana saw some of its most violent days. The murder rate went from about 300 and change to over 800. And eventually he was replaced by Julian Lezola, who was a colonel in the Mexican Army.
So, obvious question, why bring him back if violence escalated under his reign?
That is the big question everybody's asking. The experts believe that it's part of the new mayor, Carlos Bustamante's narrative, that Tijuana is safe again and come on back down for business. And part of getting to that point is showing that civilians can now take control of the police department and ensure the safety of people and try to remove the military from the streets. But that is a good theory, but the question is why Capella? It seemed that his tenure was not very well in Tijuana, so why turn to him? That's kind of one question that's lingering out there that has people scratching their heads.
Well, is Tijuana safer now?
Yes, it is much safer. From the high in 2008, the murder rate has dropped significantly. It is not back to what it was pre-2008, but it is much better. And also the spectacular violence that we saw during that time, the going into a public restaurant, shooting people, shootouts in broad daylight, that is pretty much gone. It is now basically kind of local drug gangs fighting each other for control of the local market.
What is the relationship between Capella and the military? He'll still obviously have to have a good relationship with this new position, wouldn't he?
Yes, I spoke to David Shirk, a longtime border expert at the University of San Diego, and that's one of the things that he said. Even though Capella will be at the top, that the command structure will probably still have a lot of influence from the military officers, and because of that influence, they're going to try and keep the police department under control.
Great. Jose Jimenez and KPBS reporter Katie Orr, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Free school breakfast and lunch programs feed needy children Monday through Friday, but what happens on the weekends? In just a moment, I'll show you a program helping hungry kids when they're not in school. And some guys would say this is their idea of art, a chair made out of beer cans. It's just one part of an exhibit going on in Balboa Park right now. We'll tell you all about it. This is KPBS Evening Edition.
Tonight on KPBS. At 8, it's PBS's longest-running public affairs series, featuring Washington's top journalists analyzing the week's top news stories. Washington Week. Then at 8:30, broadcast media and the web unite in an innovative approach to news gathering and reporting on Need to Know. And at 9, Grammy Award-winning guitar superstar Eric Clapton reunites with fellow guitar gods for great performances. That's tonight on KPBS.
This fall, PBS invites you to get ready for great moments and breakthrough performances, for the best in music and dance. For 9 weeks, PBS presents 9 special events from across America. The PBS Arts Fall Festival.
Fridays at 9, beginning October 14th on KPBS. KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Erwin Jacobs and by
Welcome back to KPBS Evening Edition. The Food for Kids backpack program is expanding to serve more school children in San Diego. Almost every school in the county has children who go without eating on a regular basis. I visited one of those schools to see how hunger affects behavior and learning.
School educators say too many children like these come to class hungry, especially on Monday after a long weekend.
It has a huge impact on learning in the classroom when students don't come properly nourished. And so imagine being 6, 7, 8 years old and not having eaten for 3 days, yet you're supposed to learn, and critically think about the main idea and why the author wrote this text. Really what they're saying is, I'm hungry, I want something to eat.
These are some of the faces of the chronically hungry here in San Diego County. And today, the food bank dropped off its first weekend backpack to 25 students here at Choyes Mead Elementary School.
San Diego City Council President Tony Young says it only costs about $200 to feed a child in the program for a year. When the backpack program started 5 years ago, it served 7 schools. Now it's expanded to 29 schools throughout the county. This mother of 7 boys and 1 girl says her husband just lost his job, and she's grateful for the help.
It's hard trying to, make ends meet and, paying all the bills and car payment, trying to stretch the money, have gas, and of course, it's hard.
Now, the Jacobs and Cushman San Diego Food Bank hopes to help more than 1,100 school children this year. The nonprofit already provides food to more than 340,000 people a month in the county, so donations are always needed.
A revolution was happening in the San Diego art scene. Artists and craftsmen found this city an ideal place to make things like jewelry, furniture, and pottery. A new exhibit features over 250 artworks by those San Diego artists. And here to tell us about it is the curator of the exhibit, Dave Hampton. Dave, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Joanne.
Tell us a little more about this exhibit.
Well, the show really looks almost at a culture or a community. It's looking at people involved with contemporary craft in San Diego from the late 1940s all the way up through the late 1970s. So you have almost 70 artists in the show and more than 250 works of art.
What will people see in terms of the exhibit?
Well, it does focus on craft, so this is a lot of objects that might have been used, so things like furniture or doors or bowls, pottery, but it also changes a great deal, so you see an evolution between the kind of things that people in this community were making in the late 40s with a very kind of pure Bauhaus, simple, understated look, and then you see the way that it changes as the 60s and 70s come along into sort of psychedelic areas and a lot of really expressive sculptural form.
Now, you talk about sort of the cultural revolution as well. What was happening in San Diego that inspired these artists to do this kind of work?
Well, there were a couple of things. A lot of people came to San Diego during the war because of employment opportunities with the aeronautics firms. So these would be defense contractors, aircraft plants, and they brought a lot of talented, creative people to town. But there's also environmental factors. So people were inspired by the indoor-outdoor lifestyle that people were incorporating into modernist architecture in the 1950s. They could work outdoors all year round in studios, and they began to do sort of larger environmental pieces once they were here. A couple of people in particular that moved from places like Michigan and New York State, when they came to San Diego, you can see that their work gets larger and more environmental.
Let's talk about one of the examples, the so-called beer can chair. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, these are some of my favorite pieces in the show, and they're by a local designer named Douglas Deeds. He grew up here in San Diego surfing, and these chairs were done first in about 1960, really as kind of an experiment. So this is before beer cans were being made from aluminum. They're made of steel at that time, which meant that you could weld them together. You can't do that anymore with aluminum cans. And what Doug did was to create these sort of quasi-historic forms out of recycled Budweiser cans. And they were exhibited in a major exhibition up at the Pasadena Art Museum. They were written about in industrial design magazines. And they have a really humorous but sophisticated quality. They also fall sort of squarely within the early 1960s pop art movement. So you have repeated cylinders of these Budweiser cans, just like Andy Warhol used the Campbell's soup cans in his paintings. And the chairs are really have a wry kind of quasi-historic look. So one of them is a sort of a Roman bench-shaped piece, and the other looks a bit like a Gothic cathedral. But they're used with industrial waste materials related to the 20th century. So the materials and then the historic aspect and their sophisticated engineering all come together. They're really cool.
Now, Dave, this really seems like an act of love on your part. And I was even reading in the book that goes along with the exhibit, San Diego's Craft Revolution, about this sort of group of San Diegans who get together to study this kind of art, to talk about this. Why do you do this? Why is this important to you?
Well, I just got pulled into it. I think a lot of it has to do with people. So first of all, I learned a lot from people that were interested in San Diego's modernist activity with architecture and art in the 1950s. And there were a group of people that were really interested in learning about that. And they were friends of mine. And so there was a sort of network, and there was encouragement and stimulation. But then, once I started meeting the artists, meeting them just pulled me along the rest of the way. They were so much fun. I wanted to spend all day hanging out with these artists. And now I've got a lot of them in this show, so it's really rewarding for me.
Dave, quickly let our audience know how they can find out more about this exhibit.
Well, you can find out on the Mingei's website, which is www.mingei.org.
Dave Hampton, thank you so much. The exhibit is called Craft Revolution, and it's opening next week at the Mingei Museum in Balboa Park.
We'll have a recap of our top stories in just a moment. And we'll tell you why whale lovers might want to head to the beach this weekend. This is KPBS Evening Edition.
anthrax.
Another anthrax case.
We could narrow the investigation to a very rare strain of anthrax.
There were really two sides of Dr. Ivins.
A scientist that's going rabid.
7 years, millions of dollars.
They bragged they got their man.
He killed himself before we could get to him.
Where's the smoking gun? Where's the proof?
If Dr. Ivins wasn't the perpetrator, that person is still out there.
The Anthrax Files.
Tuesday at 10 on KPBS. Next time on Doc Martin, Pauline finds the job offer letter from London.
I have every right to accuse you of opening my post if in fact you have opened my post, which you have.
How else was I going to find out? I just turn up at work one day and find the place empty.
There's a new doctor taking over.
What's going to happen to me?
And Aunt Joan is taken in a boarder, and it's not easy.
Oh, what's the matter? It's your breath. What, you saying I stink?
On Doc Martin, Thursdays at 9 on KPBS.
Welcome back to the Public Square on KPBS Evening Edition. Earlier this week, we told you about a single mother living in substandard housing. Gracilia Ramirez lives with her son in a rented City Heights apartment with roaches, rats, and mold. But an investigation by Speak City Heights, a media collaborative, revealed the woman has few options. Agencies that are supposed to help with substandard housing have been cut back or consolidated. Many of you weighed in on this story. Jacqueline says, I think the fear of eviction or retaliation is real on the part of tenants, especially among persons who are struggling to get by and for whom moving expenses are untenable for their financial situation. And one commenter pointed out what we missed in our reporting. KPBS missed an opportunity to inform listeners about the City of San Diego's Environmental Services Department's Lead Safety and Healthy Homes program, which serves as a clearinghouse to connect San Diego residents with help. You can weigh in on any of the stories you saw by following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, and of course, you can always email us. And we want to clarify something from tonight's roundtable. The new police chief of Tijuana, Alberta Capella, was formally named to the post yesterday.
Now, recapping tonight's top stories, protesters have marched on San Diego Civic Center. They call it Occupy San Diego and say it's a protest of corporate greed. Republican leaders say blaming the wealthy for the nation's economic problems is the incorrect conclusion. And yesterday was the deadline for San Diego Unified students to have their whooping cough vaccine or a waiver. Anyone who didn't turn their paperwork had to stay home today. The district says less than 1,700 students missed school.
Before we leave you tonight, we want to share some photos of an amazing sight off the San Diego coast. Blue whales swimming in a red tide. The whales have been spotted unusually close to shore off Del Mar and La Jolla. Marine biologists at the Birch Aquarium say the whales are probably attracted by an unusually large amount of their main food, krill. The scientists say there's been a large upwelling of cold water off our coast, and that means more krill near the shore. The krill are not what's causing the red tide, though. That's created by algae. The cold water could last until the end of the month, so the whales could stick around until then. You can watch and comment on any of the stories you saw tonight on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition.
Thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great weekend.
And we'll leave you with a look at the forecast. Good night.